In 2009, I wrote my book called Not All Black Girls Know How to Eat, and the reason I wrote my book is because the way my trauma showed up was as an eating disorder. My oldest sister had a drug problem, and my middle sister had a marriage issue, meaning there were lots of marriages. Not necessarily healthy relationships. We all unpacked our trauma differently, or did not unpack our trauma, and so it showed up differently in how we functioned in the world. None of us were happy, none of us were healthy. I also come from an environment where you do not seek mental health support. It is looked down on, and I believe that for me, it was a failure to fall outside of the strong Black woman archetype. Like to me, being strong meant suffering in silence. And I stand here to say that I no longer believe that. As a matter of fact, I feel like I've been bamboozled with that thought. And I have, since redefined what it means to be strong, and strong for everybody. Is like dealing what the underlying issues are that are keeping you from being your full self and thriving. So that's how it started. She was cute and innocent, and this was shortly before I went into foster care, which you don't know that that's going to affect you being away from your parents, or in my case, parent. I'm a mom now, so it's so interesting because I look at the, my lens has expanded in how I look at the world and how I am in the world. Yeah, that happened. That was shortly before my mother decided to dye my hair red and send me off to school. I don't have the complexion for red hair. I don't care what anyone says, I just don't. But I grew up in a very matriarchal household where, children were seen and not heard. You did what your parents said. My mother said to me years later, because when she passed a few years ago, she had gone to college in her 50s and gotten her bachelor's, her undergrad, and then she went to grad school in her 60s. And when she passed at 75, she was in a PhD program, which I think is kind of amazing. But when I was born, I was the third of her children, and she was 20 years old. And I can't imagine, you all are that age. So having 3 kids, that's where she was. But she used to say to me, the reason she was so hard on us and the reason that my sisters and I did not understand what it meant, did not feel loved, did not have a demonstrative show of affection, is because she wanted to make us strong, because she thought the world would chew us up and spit us out. And for her, raising 3 girls alone in New York City, she wanted us to be able to deal with anything. And what I have since learned is, by being physically demonstrative, by being someone who listens to my child, by being available, I've raised a human who feels like she can thrive in the world. She does not think there's anything she's not capable of doing if she puts her mind to it. I had a lot of fear and anxiety based on how I was raised, because she didn't have a role model, so I didn't have a role model. And so by doing the work that I'm going to talk about today, I was able to become a role model. This says, I just know if I could only lose a few pounds, everything in my life would fall in place. This is how I used to think. I used to think a couple of things. One, if I had enough money. Oh, if I just had enough money. Then I moved to Los Angeles and was surrounded by rich people with a lot of self-esteem issues. Addictions, problems, unhappiness. And I realized, oh, money does not fix you. It just gives you more ways to, avoid. And also, it pays for therapy. So that is something, it gives you that. I grew up food insecure. I didn't understand the difference between being poor and food insecure, and I remember someone wrote an article about me, and they cited me a lot in this article about food insecurity. And I read it and I was hostile. I was like, what? What is this person talking about? Like, what is this fancy jargon? I was poor. Well, the truth is I had neighbors who had food. I actually, as one of the things I did to protect myself as a child, I became friends with neighbors who had two parents or food. If you had food, I could be funny and charming at 7 years old. I knew where to go to get fed. And I remember I was around 11 years old, and my neighbor, who I would go to their house every day, was like, stop coming to my house so we can feed you. That was shame. Now, underlying a lot of addictions, underlying a lot of issues are feeling like a burden and feeling ashamed, a sense of shame. Like that is the one thing most people who go through the doorway of addiction have in common. So I could look in a mirror and I saw the girl in the mirror. I did not see this other human because I never wanted to be white. I never, like that just didn't occur to me because like I got like melanin. Like people who don't have this much melanin don't understand the gift of melanin. I'm in my 50s. This is a gift. So I really wanted to be black. But what I wanted to be was a place where you could not see that I was in pain. And I thought if I was overweight, if I looked a certain way, you would think I had my shit together. You would not be like, oh, that girl's a hot mess. Like, I wanted to present as someone who didn't have high levels of trauma. And when I, had an eating disorder in my late teens and early 20s, mid-20s, there wasn't a lot of information about like what causes an eating disorder. There was like, yeah, you want to control. There was no one had done any research or study about trauma. So I'm going to talk to you guys about trauma, and I hope that's the next slide. This is me just describing what eating disorders are. So before I get to trauma, there's an eating disorder that's rampant in everybody's community that people aren't aware is an eating disorder, right? It's a form of bulimia, and that is laxative abuse. That is diuretics. That is dieter's tea. That is those pills that they sell on Instagram, okay? And people who get addicted to those, that's a form of bulimia. It wrecks your system to the point where you could die or be in the hospital, right? Like there are no shortcuts. Like the one thing I have learned as someone who has had to do a lot of work to become a person who can stand in front of you and be like, girl, listen, it was hard and now I have all of these coping mechanisms. Now, if I'm on the phone with someone and I get this like bad feeling before I get off the phone, or after I get off the phone, my brain goes, oh, something uncomfortable just happened. You just got triggered. And I'm able to like rewind the tape really quickly. It's like second nature for me. But before, I would just immediately get this shame or get this feeling of not enoughness and then just be walking around with that. And then having to like try and figure out how to not feel that. And that was a whatever it takes situation. Whatever it takes to not feel that level of uncomfortableness, of discomfort, of shame, of pain, that's what I was doing. Because I just, like, I didn't know. I had a mother who was a child when she had children. So 1 in 4 people who suffer from eating disorders are non-white. 1 in 5 are poor. This was probably 15 years ago. I'm pretty sure that's, 10 years ago, statistics have changed. And during COVID, everything has like magnified, right? Because people who normally could go into the world, you'd go to a party, you'd hang out with your friends, you had your community, you had a way to avoid, right? You go out to a party, meet a cute guy, meet a cute girl, like guy meets guy, whatever you did, it was like you had ways to not sit in your discomfort and pain and shame and all of that. COVID happened, global pandemic. A lot of us were just sitting home. everything was on the screen. We didn't have a way to connect with each other. You know, the opposite of addiction is connection, right? That is the one thing that will combat addiction, right? If you feel something and you bring it into a room that is safe, and you share that, it is no longer in your body. I learned these things. I learned that sitting in silence is going to kill me, okay? And I don't do that anymore. This has changed the game for me. Because I'd love to talk, but now having information, and I'm one of these people who love information. I want to know why. I want to dig down. I want to research. I have people emailing me in institutions and UNC and different schools, and I want to know. So about 15 years ago, there was a program that was in Arizona, and it was created by the CDC, Center for Disease Control, and Kaiser Permanente, which is, I don't know if you guys have Kaiser. But, so they started a program to help with obesity. So people got in this program, and the majority of people who were part of this program were white men over 60 with at least one college degree. And they would come in because they were morbidly obese, and after losing 50% of the weight, 50% of people would drop out. And they kept scratching their head being like, what's happening? They're doing so well. Why are people dropping out? And then that's how they discovered the ACEs, which is the only test that quantifies trauma. And I like to call them macro traumas because there are lots of things that can be micro traumas. This is where we're gonna do a simple diagnosis, self-diagnosis of ACEs. ACEs are adverse child experience tests. So basically, it's gonna tell you what your trauma is. Now, before we get started, I have a trauma score again of 8. But let me explain what the ACEs are. ACEs are physical abuse, sexual abuse, neglect, physical, emotional, and mental. So it's, I don't have shoes. I don't have new shoes. I don't have clean shoes. I don't have clothes that fit. I don't have, I'm not being fed properly. These are all traumas. So I just named 5 traumas, right? Another trauma is having a parent who's absent from the home. Another is having a parent who has a mental illness. Another is having a parent who's physically abused. Yes, having a parent who has an addiction, and having a parent who's in prison. So those are the ACEs. So if you do the math, you can quickly realize, oh, I have 2, I have 3, I have 4. Now, here's what's great about the test. A lot of times, we have normalized trauma. We're like, yeah, I went through that. I was sexually abused, but I'm over it. Yeah, I didn't have a parent. My father wasn't there, but F him, it doesn't matter. No. Those are huge. Now, one of those traumas can be monumental, right? Oh, divorce is a trauma. One of those traumas can be monumental, right? Add on. So to me, if you have a sexual abuse trauma, that's as big as 4 of the traumas. I don't believe that the traumas are necessarily equal, but it's quantitative. You just keep adding and you keep adding. So I have 8 of those, right? I was poor. I had a rapist uncle. I had a parent who just didn't want to show up, especially if it was going to cost him any money. So I had a lot of traumas. But for me, when you're in your world, right, you're in your house, that's normal for you. Because we're machines and our bodies take care of us. So if you're under all of this trauma, what happens is you're like this. Your body's ramping up, right? So you're not being fed. You're there's abuse in your house, so you're having to protect yourself and to shut this off. And so your body is working at such a high rate compared to like a normal person who's just skipping through life and, all the needs are met and they've never gone hungry and they've always, they don't have that. So then you're more capable, like you're more likely to, become obese, have a drug addiction, have a sexual addiction, or have unhealthy boundaries. You'll have broken bones, COPD. My mother died of COPD. Stroke, cancer, heart disease, suicide attempts, depression, diabetes, STDs. You'll miss work, drug use, alcoholism, smoking, lack of physical activity, because we want to protect ourselves from this pain and this fear. And the only way to do it is to, like, smoke a cigarette, eat. Like, a lot of times when people are morbidly obese, you don't often know how you feel because food has become such a tool that you're eating, so you're shoving down any feelings. So if you say to someone, hey, maybe you should look at this, they're like, I'm fine, because you don't have access to your feelings. Like, one of the first things that happened to me when I stopped taking laxatives, exercising like a crazy person, throwing up, I did all I had all of it, starving, is I suddenly, things that seemed easy for other people, like suddenly I'm like, oh my God, my rent's due. I literally I was suicide. I would go from 0 to suicide because I had no coping mechanisms. I didn't know how to sit with discomfort. I didn't know how to sit because it wasn't like I was just moderately failing. I was the worst. I mean, it was all gonna crash. Everyone was gonna know. People were gonna laugh at me. It was like, in my head, I had these really big fears that just would become bigger. And eventually, I had the suicide attempts. I knew there was something better. I moved away from my family. It wasn't about them. But I knew that they were against me going to therapy. And I knew that they were against me going into any community and telling secrets. Like, you don't talk about what happens, My aunt used to have this saying. Now I look at it and I'm like, which was, don't let the left hand know what the right hand is doing. I'm like, what? What in the ignorance is that? And that meant you got to keep it all to yourself. Like secrets. Secrets will kill you. Because you're more than your secret, right? You're more than whatever happened to you. You're more than the limitations that were put on you. When I was growing up, my mother would always say to me, you're poor, you're black, you're a woman. Life is just going to be hard for you. I was like 10 years old. The stress of that belief, the stress of believing there was something so big I could not outrun, out-succeed. It didn't matter if I thought I was special. It didn't matter if my teacher told me I can do anything. I was like, no, I'm poor, I'm black, I'm a woman. My life is gonna be hard. And that tape was behind a lot of my behavior, right? I had a father, Ivy League educated, very successful. He was like, yeah, I'll hang out with you. I'll take you to dinner. And I'd say, well, we don't have any food at home. And he was like, well, that's up to your mother. It's up to your mother. And I was like, you don't feel any kind of way about that? And he's like, nope. And I was like, you're an asshole. And he was like, I know, but that was my, I think it was crazy. I look back and I'm like, the idea that my child could ever be hungry is just shocking. It's painful. Like now I understand it as unhealthy, abnormal, abusive, pain. Like, it's painful. And so when you have trauma, do not negate your trauma. It could be something you're like, Well, it's not that big a deal. Go online, do the ACEs test, the Adverse Childhood Experience test. And once you quantify your trauma, you can no longer deny it. You can grow up in a house where you got every gift known to man. But if you're treated badly, if you're not validated, right? If you're talked down to, right? If you're told you get an A or you're nothing, that's all trauma. Because it does not allow you to be human. It does not allow you to be imperfect. Perfection, I had to fire the God of perfection. Because I used to be like, well, I'm just going to give up because I am never going to be perfect. I wasted a lot of time because I really believed that I had to be perfect. I don't even know where that came from. But it was there. So, and I grew up in a household where nobody looked like me. Nobody looked like me. I should have shown you a picture of my mother. She's like 10 shades lighter with green eyes, my sisters. People would walk in my house and go, that's your family? What happened to you? Because I grew up in Brooklyn and people have colorism issues. They're color struck. Luckily, that was a place where my mother won. She was like, oh, people are ignorant. You don't listen to that. But I have friends who grew up in households where that was validated. So we all have something. Sitting next to you is someone who's struggling with something different. And I say this because when I was in my late 20s, early 30s, I started joining these groups where people talked about their feelings and their lives. And I was like, oh, wait, you were going through that too? Because I wished that there was a community where we all could have just been honest. And I didn't feel like such an outlier or such a weirdo or just so alone and isolated. Because it's isolating. We were talking about this earlier at lunch. It's isolating to be the person in your family who no longer wants the status quo to continue, who wants to do better, be better, who wants to uncover their trauma, who wants to stop the cycle of generational trauma, right? So it all starts with you. You can't look back. You can't wonder why. Like, parents, they did the best they could. Even if it was a complete shit show, they did the best they could. Even if it was great, and for some reason, it didn't vibe with you, but your siblings are fine, right? We all grow up in households, and we all can have different takeaways from that experience. And I think it's very important to understand that one is not more valid than the other, but you have to stay honest about what yours is, because that's where the work can start. You can't do anybody else's work. I remember when I started recovering and going to therapy, which was a thing for my mother. Because where I grew up in Brooklyn, if you weren't on the corner talking to yourself with a bottle of something in your hand, then you were fine. But I was like, I feel crazy in here because I had things happen to me and I never got help, and nobody ever made it a real issue. Nobody ever said, oh, you're not a magnet for this. You just grew up around some unsafe adults. I was like, oh, that's a concept, that it's not me that's like attracted this, but there's people who prey on children. Oh, okay. Whew. But I was in my 20s and 30s when that like really hit home for me, because no one was talking about it. Children raised by an adult with one or more ACEs are 1,000 times more likely to suffer from their own experiences. So if you have a parent who has not done the work, any work, y'all can continue that thought. They did their best. They're working at a deficit. I remember moving to Los Angeles, even before I left New York, but moving to Los Angeles and meeting a whole bunch of people who had a ACE score of 0. I was like, what? And then I, had that depression of feeling sorry for myself. Like, what? Like, you mean your parents paid for college and they sent you money and you got to do that? Like, what? They bought you a car. Like, what? You never went hungry. Like, what? You went on vacation. Like, what? Like, I just remember talking to people and being like, oh, Black people, everybody can have kids. Like, we don't all grow up. Like, it's not normal what I went through. And I think that what's important is that I was dogged. At a point, I was like, I'm either gonna die or I'm gonna get better. But there was no in between. There was no comfort in my body. I couldn't sit with the anxiety because I was in pain and because I was in, I started looking at I traveled a little, I looked at the world and I was like, this is not enough for me. Like I kept quitting jobs and relationships and cities. Like I kept running because my mother was that kind of person. I went to 11 schools before I graduated high school. We were not in the military. There was no reason for all of this, except when she got uncomfortable, there was movement that happened and I was the youngest and I went with her. Didn't pass that on. This is the percentage of people who have eating disorders. And by the way, it could be anything, right? For me, it was an eating disorder. I feel really lucky because it saved my life. I was that bad. Like, I don't really like drugs to that extent. I'm not like that big a drinker. I mean, I like a cocktail, but I'm not, I'm not ever gonna need to be like in rehab. It doesn't interest me that way. I had a sister who did drugs, so I was like, ooh, that's messy. I didn't know we were both the same. I did not know. I was like, I have a little more secret, mine is more secretive. Depression. I grew up chronically depressed. I did not know it. We did not talk about it. I had a mother who had suicide attempts. I had aunts who had suicide attempts. We did not talk about it. It was just like your kids went off to the relatives while you dealt with your mental health issue. Then you came back. You did not continue to get help. And then you waited until you got full and you blow up again. And then it's just like cycles of dealing, of functioning, but there was no cycle to uncover and to unpack and to get to the root of the trauma. Lots of trauma, lots of sexual partners. That's just how it goes. It is normal to look for a connection, because that's what we crave as humans. We want a connection. So often we'll just take the connection we have at the moment. Here's what I will say. If someone likes you, you know it. You know how you know it? Because you don't have to call them. You don't have to reach out for them. If you have to ask, does this person like me? Keep moving. Keep moving. You deserve more. You deserve better. And when I started to love myself, the game changed. The game just completely changed for me. And that's what I want you all to know. Where you are, it's just like a stage of your life. This is not your whole life. What's happening now is you're starting to get information. Information is power, right? Once you have the information, you can then decide what you want. Here's what's great. You guys are all in college. You know what that means? Free help. Just someone standing there waiting to listen, to hear you. I remember I moved to LA and I was like, I need a therapist. I can't. So I went to this place. I went to the YMCA because they had a sliding scale and I was a struggling writer and that's what I needed. And I said, I can only have a Black therapist. No one else is going to understand me. This is what I need. So finally, after 2 or 3 months, they called me up and they said, we have a therapist for you. So I went in. And at the time, I was emotionally unavailable. So I had a big crush on some guy who was a friend of mine. Problem is, he lived with a woman who he'd been living with for years. Now, for some reason, nothing had happened, but I was obsessing about our connection. What's funny is he's still one of my best friends. Like, obsessing. I wanted this man in the same way I wanted food. I was like, oh, that person. So I go to the therapist and I said, yeah, I kind of like this. I was 23. I was like, or 24. I was like, I like this guy, and I know he really likes me, but he's unavailable. And she goes, in some cultures we share men. It's okay to share men. I was like, wrong therapist for me. I need to expand my list. Can't just be black. Maybe I'm going to get past that. So the next therapist I had was this like intense Jewish woman from New York. I was with her for 6 years. I unpacked a lot of stuff. She helped me unpack it. And so I'm saying I constantly was putting roadblocks in front of myself when I was on the road to get better. I was like, well, it's going to have to be this. I'm not doing, because I was so misunderstood, and I was misunderstood in a very big way. And then I was like, oh, I'm just normal. I'm not even special. I'm just, like, there's nothing, like, I'm special to people who love me. But to the rest of the world, I'm just not special. And so I had to get over my specialness to get better. And then now I don't want to be special. I don't even care, right? Because it's snowing. There's constant roadblocks that we put up in on the road to becoming our best self. So I'm saying to you, pay attention to what your roadblocks are, to the things where you limit yourself. You're in a school and therapy is free. When I started going to therapy, I felt cheated. I was like, my whole life I've been told this is bad. There's a 50-minute hour where someone is just there committed to you, committing to helping you become your best self, committing to help you live with less stress, less trauma, less depression, less anxiety. It is free. Do you know how much therapy costs in the outside world? Run, don't walk. And by the way, you're not going to connect with every therapist. If you're talking to someone, you're like, I can't with, ma'am, I can't with you. Ask for someone else. So you are going to be your biggest advocate. Behavior is predictable. And it doesn't even mean that you could be messy. It can mean you could be a people pleaser, which is horrible, right? Because if you're making everyone happy, guess who's not? You. Guess whose needs come last? Yours. That's not, I'm going to talk more about that in the solutions. Sometimes I've heard this in the communities where I come from, where you'd see a girl or a boy, he's getting in trouble, she's being what you call fast, and everyone would be like, oh, someone got at that person. And it's like, certain things aren't normal. Certain things happen as a response. And so this is my way of saying, be gentle with people. Because we're all, especially at your age, acting and reacting as a response of what we have been through, right? Like if someone, I'm just gonna say, has a Birkin bag mentality and they're like, look at they want to show you the shiny things and not like how they feel about themselves, right? So it's like don't go on Instagram or social media and be confused by what you believe is happiness, okay? There are people all the time who seem to have had these great lives and they're committing suicide. Because we gotta just learn to love ourselves, and that's a journey, right? Like when you start liking yourself, you are halfway there. Like really, really who you are. Right? Not when I get here, right? So this is me saying, pay attention if you're living life on the layaway plan. When I was a kid, there was a store called Learner's in Brooklyn, which my mother would take me and my two sisters, we'd pick out our clothes for school, and she'd put some money down, and they'd hold those clothes. And every week, she'd pay a little more, and she'd pay a little more, and she'd pay a little more. And eventually, we got those clothes, and we looked fly. It was like, oh my God, we got some new clothes, we look fly, right? So what happens a lot, and I did it, I used to think, well, when I get the car, the job, the man, the perfect body, then I can. I saw this, and it like broke my heart, and yet I lived in this household. I have something called Team Stephanie. Team Stephanie is, these are what you all would refer to as my ride or dies. They are people who are there and who hold me accountable and love me no matter what. They cheerlead me. I don't ever get off the phone with them feeling funky. I don't ever talk to them and feel like, and if I do, I'm like, wait, whoa, whoa, what was that? Did you mean to say that to me? Let's talk about that. Because here's how it works. They're on my team, I'm on their team. There's no ride or dying because none of us want to die. We don't do that. But we are on each other's team. So I have family members, they're not on my team. I'm okay with that. I have a sister, we're like hard. So find yourself a team. And you'll know your team because you'll feel a sense of home and safety with them. If people make you feel like you're not quite enough yet, that's not your team. And that means if you're dating someone, no one in your intimate space who's not on your team. And you can check for signs in your body. Your gut will tell you everything. Everything. If you suddenly feel discomfort I've been married. I'm like, it doesn't feel great. My gut was like, nope, nope, nope. I was like, bye. My friends are like, I'm like, who am I serving by staying in a relationship where I don't feel like seen, appreciated, like what am I teaching my daughter? So that's one thing. People pleasing, we've discussed this. Let me tell you something. Especially as women, a lot of cultures, we are raised to take care of ourselves less, okay? Something's wrong with that. I know families where the kid's not allowed to move away because they got to stay with the family, even though it's like they're the one they're like a rocket ship and they need to take off, right? Take off. They're gonna be fine. Like we sometimes have to teach each other what we need, and that it's okay. I have to do this to take. I know. It makes you unhappy or whatever, but this is what I have to do. I've had so many of those conversations. Here's how I always describe myself. If you look at the ring of Saturn, right? Like there's a ring around me. That first inner ring, those are people who are like, those are my people. I have a second ring around me. Those are people who, they could be my people. They're kind of my people. I'm not like 100% safe with them. Like they may talk about me behind my back. I don't know. And then there's a third ring, we just hard acquaintances. But I have lived long enough that some of the people in the third ring can sometimes work their way up to the front. And some people in that front ring got to go to the back, right? So we're always moving and changing, so you have to protect yourself. So that first ring of Saturn, that has to be people who are just like, those are your people. And if they do something to prove they're not, you got to let them go. Let them go to the third ring. Don't fight what the universe is trying to teach you. And then a lot of times when we had trauma, or we might not have had trauma, but our parents have had trauma. So they're raising us with a certain level of PTSD that then becomes our PTSD. So, check for signs in your body as you move through the world. Like, why am I feeling this, right? Like this, and because sometimes that can be your biggest favor of something, you feel that PTSD, you're like, this is bringing me back to a moment of extreme discomfort. That means like not, danger, move away from this. So that's very important. Breaking up with perfectionism. One of the best things you can do. okay? Because if you have to be perfect, first of all, who are you being perfect for? It's never for yourself. You know, I remember when my daughter was going off to college and her dad was like, oh, you should be this and you should do this. And I was like, I don't care what you do, girl. Just go to college. Go, come back. Like, you don't have to know what you're doing at 18, 19, 20, 21. You don't have to know. Just go off and go to college. You will find things that interest you. And he was like, I think you should. He had very structured, traditional careers you should do. And I was like, don't do that. I said, I don't want you living your life for your parents. It's just, that's not your job. If he wanted to be a doctor, he should have become one. Because no, you don't have to live his dream. But as parents, sometimes there is that pressure where we want our children to live our dreams. You know, ultimately, your parent wants to know that you can support yourself. That's the goal. We want you to be able to support yourself. So, you know, just pay attention to that, okay? I think it's very important at your age to realize, who am I? What is it I want? What is it I need? Because it's a lot of pressure to live your life for someone else, even your parents. I already said living life on the layaway plan. Assume that everyone is going through something. Some people just hide it better. Some people can look really shiny, okay? And I remember my daughter came to me once in elementary school and she was like, do you wish I was more popular? I was like, what? No. I said, you don't want to bloom right now. Wait, just wait. You don't want to bloom in high school. And then I was like, you don't want to bloom in college. She might be blooming in college, but I was like, I bloomed at 30. You know, that is the truth. You know, I barely, excuse me guys, had breast in high school. Like I was just not there. So I'm like, you can bloom later. So that's also like, there's a thing that we do, especially now that social media is big, is compare and despair. You look online, it's like that person went to that country, that person's doing that. You may get to do that later, right? It's like, this is where you are, like bloom where you're planted, like make the best of this moment, right? Don't be sleeping on this moment because you're daydreaming about like someone else's fabulous life. How many times do you watch people on social media in these fantastic relationships and then someone's crying that they broke up? It's like, and you were like, if you're not in there, if you're not living in the house with people, just like have a little bit of grace about like their experience, that you're not getting the full picture. It's like a newspaper. You read the conservative, you get one side. You read the liberal, you get one side. Truth is going to be in the middle, okay? Focus on yourself. Stay in your lane. This is so important. Sometimes you'll see someone doing something and you'll be like, oh, I want to do that. The gifts that are going to come to you are going to come because you are in your lane. You're doing that thing that you're doing. So that, you know, it's normal to covet or to be like, oh, I wish like, you know how many times I'm like, I wish I had an easier life from the beginning. Like, I just wish I had an easier life. I didn't. But if I had an easier life, I wouldn't be meeting any of you. So you don't know where your path will lead you, but stay on your path. Forgive yourself. Self-forgiveness, because a lot of times we don't know that we need to forgive ourselves. You know, sometimes we need to forgive ourselves for expecting things that are not germane to us, right? Like, why aren't you, I remember, like, I have a really good friend and recently, and he said, God, you're just so sensitive. And I was like, thank you. I took that as the biggest compliment. I said, do you know how many years I tried to not have feelings? Yes, I'm sensitive. What you said hurt my feelings. Can you please stop if I say it bothers me? Stop. I don't want to talk about something that's like, I'm like, stop. It's not funny. Oh, you're just so sensitive. That is the biggest thing I have come to at this point in my life. it was almost like he didn't know he was giving me he's like my brother, so annoying. But he didn't even know he was giving me a compliment. I came from a place where it was unsafe to feel my feelings, to a place where I feel all of them. And now I don't feel all of them all of the time. That's what happens through, therapy. In the beginning, you feel all your feelings all the time and you're gonna die. And then you're like, oh, what's that? Oh, I'm sad, okay, all right. Wait, I don't feel suicidal, I'm just sad, okay. I cycled through this because I came from a mother who smoked 3 packs of cigarettes a day. Because she didn't want any of the feelings. And when they came out, they were not pretty. And, it's just like, there's something about liking yourself in the body you're in. And I'm still like, I was looking at some, I said I like TikTok if anyone's listening to it. I was looking at some TikTok, these 2 women in their 70s or 80s, and they were talking about, one of them was like, I'm writing my 6th book right now, and this one's like, I'm writing a play, and I was like, I got so much time, It's like you have time. Be gentle with yourself. If you're not gentle with yourself, you teach other people not to be gentle with you. When I stopped treating myself badly or thinking badly of myself, and someone would do it, it would be like, wait, what was that? Like, no. But before that, I almost didn't even notice. So just know that we give off an energy. And it's not our fault, but just pay attention. Like, am I talking negatively to myself so that when someone else talks negatively to you, you either don't notice it or it causes you pain? It's like, oh, I need to stop talking like that to myself, right? Like, I was joking earlier. I'm like the music in my background is go bad bitch, go bad bitch, go bad bitch, go bad bitch. Like, that's the music in my head, like all the time. Sometimes I'm walking around my house singing that. I'm like, thank God for TikTok. I learned a new song, but I say that to myself, not even like I think it's fun, and so you got to find a way to have fun with this experience called life, right? Like, y'all should hear the music I put on in my house. I put this music on and I'm like, yeah, like I dance around my house. I'm living my best life in my 50s because I did not do this life perfectly, but I got here. And this was, not where I thought I was going. I did not want to be the girl who was like gonna go talk to people about throwing up, but it's because I wanted to throw up all of the pain I was feeling, and I didn't know how to do it. And today, I don't live with this pain in my body anymore. And my grandmother died with it in her. My mother died with it in her. My great-grandmother died with, you know what I mean? It's like that song, that saying, don't die with the music still left in you. That's the goal. That's my goal when I talk to someone. I don't want you to die with the music still left in you because you're too busy trying to avoid this discomfort. It's temporary. Life is so long. Like I lost all of my 20s to my addiction and to recovery, and I gained. Like, when people meet me, they're like, how old are you? I'm like, I'm old. But it's like I got my youth back because I took care of myself and I did the things to make, to make life better. And I'm always willing to be of service. Or you can, if you look me up, you can text me or email me. I respond. I love nothing more than when a young person is like, hey, I have a question. And so the last thing I will say is, this has been the thing that has meant the most to me. Go where the love is. Go where the love is. And by that, make sure you understand what love is, okay? Like define love for yourself in a healthy way, right? Love is someone on your team. It's not somebody making excuses. It's not someone putting you last. Like, none of that's love. Love, I don't know what that is, right? Go where the love is. I always go where the love is. Like if I walk in a room and it's like, yay, Stephanie's here. That's the room I want to be in. I don't want to be in the room where people are like, what's she wearing? What's she doing? That's not for me. It's not for me. It's not for you. That's not for you.